Yo, what's up? Today we're going to be talking about the meta. So a lot of my videos recently have been talking about like specific things that you can do inside of the dungeons. Today we're going to be talking about classes that you're going to be seeing a lot, specs that you're going to be seeing a lot, and just kind of how the meta has evolved over the past couple of weeks and what specs are looking like they're going to be super popular and super dominant. As of course, a lot of specializations are good in varying ways, and how you use them in specific Mythic Plus dungeons and whatever is going to vary pretty widely. And I would say that this meta is certainly a bit more flexible than we have seen in the past. Now, there are some things that are, I would say, a bit more rigid, but it's not something that's like this meta is very, very stale in the sense of we're going to have a god comp this season. And we can kind of talk about some of the things and some of the trends that we've seen thus far with the meta. So if you go to the front page of Raider.io and look at who are timing keys, you actually see a pretty widespread of tanks. This is relatively common at the very beginning of the season. Typically, the tank role does start to consolidate once people are willing to, just kind of gear strictly for Mythic Plus. But right now, we're seeing actually a pretty good diversity of tanks between Vengeance Demon Hunter, Prot Paladin. There's even a Brewmaster Monk as well, and then even some Prot Warriors down here. So it seems like there's definitely some stuff that some of the tanks are able to do where they're not falling super far behind early on, which is actually a pretty good sign that we're going to have a decently open meta. Now, I don't know if the tank role is going to be the role that's actually the most flexible, but it's definitely a role that, as of right now, you're actually seeing some diversity. Okay, so for the healer role, you actually also are getting a decent amount of diversity, and I think that this will probably continue, where you see Disc Priest, Restoration Druid, and Mistweaver Monk all at the top end seeing some varying play. I think this comes down to kind of like compositional things where you actually see just like how does Resto Druid fit into this comp? How does Discipline Priest fit into this comp? How does Mistweaver Monk fit into this comp? And once you kind of see those kind of things evolve and develop, I think that the healer is actually more flexible than it typically is, because the reason for like the tank and the healer typically being less flexible is players, since there's only one of them allowed in a dungeon per role, then players reroll to the absolute best of that specialization or that role, because it makes the dungeon just that much easier. And on top of that, it also does other things, like it allows you to be able to look at other groups whenever they're doing their keys and kind of discover that way. But I mean, this is only at the high end, like the very, very tip top end. Even if you start looking at rank like 20 and up, you're kind of seeing something similar where even Blood Decay, while it's not like there wasn't like stuff at the super high end, Blood Decay is actually getting pretty decent representation. And whenever you talk to high end players, typically they'll say that Vengeance Demon Hunter is the best tank, and then things like Protection Paladin and Blood Decay are probably second, and then Prot Warrior I think is like the consensus like fourth, because Prot Warrior actually does a lot of really cool stuff with Spell Reflect this season. But at the end of the day, I think it's like Vengeance is super dominant. Funnily enough, it's actually less dominant at like top 40 world key level than it is apparently at 20 and up. But it makes sense. Vengeance is very good. And then again, for healers, like we were talking about earlier, healers, this is definitely a really good season for healer balance. It might be something where it consolidates really down to just Disc Priest later on, but I really do think Restoration Druid brings a lot of cool stuff with Mark of the Wild buff. Mr. Monk, if you're playing like a melee comp or like a fizz damage comp, can actually be quite good. Say you end up playing like a BM Hunter, a Rogue, and a Demon Hunter, like a Havoc Demon Hunter. I think the Mistweaver Monk could be phenomenal for your group. For DPS, it's a bit weird. And I think that this is something that's going to shift with time as groups get a bit more adjusted. So first off, we'll talk about Havoc Demon Hunter. I think Havoc Demon Hunter is mandatory. I mean, we ranked them in our tier list, and whenever we had S tier, this is the Wowhead tier list. Whenever we had S tier, I was very, very dead set on having Havoc in S tier. If you go to Subcreation or if you go to u.gg, you see something similar for DPS, where Havoc Demon Hunter is the best melee by like a pretty considerable amount, both by representation and by just the amount of damage that they're dealing. Havoc is quite good. I expect that you're going to see at least one of them in every single composition for the remainder of the season. Now, something that we knew was good from the PTR, but didn't exactly know was as good as it currently is Beast Mastery Hunter. And we put it in B+ tier in our Wowhead tier list. And obviously, like, This is a bit more subjective. But the reason that we put it in B plus is because we actually think it's going to start falling off a little bit at high end, and you're already seeing less and less play of Beast Mastery Hunter if you're looking at the front page. Whereas if you look at all keys done at level 20 and up, you're seeing 12% of keys actually involving Beast Mastery Hunter, which is a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of people doing 20s and up, but a lot of them are involving Beast Mastery Hunter, and a lot of that comes down to the spec does a lot of damage. Ultimately, the spec is going to fall off, especially some of these bosses do just an insane amount of damage. And Beast Mastery Hunter, they have like 900k HP, and so they are able to live, but it's not about necessarily just living, but it's about the utility that they bring to a dungeon. Whenever you think about like what specializations are bringing to a dungeon, there's a certain level of utility that is nice and necessary, and Beast Mastery Hunter has typically seen as the worst CC of every form. They have the worst AoE stun with Binding Shot. They have the worst knock with High Explosive Trap. Their single target stun is not bad with Pet Stun, but like they don't really have anything good, and so there's a question as to whether or not Beast Mastery Hunter is going to fall off. But as it currently stands, Beast Mastery Hunter looks great, and it's been performing super well. And if you've been playing Beast Mastery Hunter, I'm sure you've been topping the meters in all of your keys, leading to a lot more people being willing to invite Beast Mastery Hunters. The other DPS that's actually seeing really high popularity is Augmentation Evoker. As a surprise to absolutely nobody, Aug is a specialization that it's not the most popular thing in like the plus 20 key range, but certainly as you start to go higher, augmentation becomes a lot more valuable, especially in tyrannical weeks. I was playing keys yesterday without an Augmentation Evoker, and it became very clear very fast why Aug was going to be good this season. There are a lot of bosses that will one-shot you, and even if Augmentation Evoker is not doing the best damage in the game, the utility that is provided by the Augmentation Evoker defensively, the defensive value of the Aug Evoker really makes the key a lot easier on just the DPS in the group, but also the healer. Now, it's interesting to see like how it's going to evolve, because if you look at logs, they look really bad. They look like they're doing tank damage, but you have to investigate a little bit further, and there's a lot of issues with augmentation logging as it currently stands. Preheat made a video about it recently. If you really want to research it a bit more, you can go check out that video by Preheat. I think that Augmentation Evoker is still going to be in the meta comp. And then beyond that, you're seeing other stuff like, you're actually seeing decent representation of Ret Paladins, you're seeing decent representation of Rogues, them splitting between Outlaw and Assassination. You're also seeing decent representation of Demonology Warlock. I'm kind of surprised. I don't know how good Demonology is going to be like as the season progresses, but as it currently stands, Demonology is shaping up to be pretty decent. And then you're seeing an okay representation from Balanced Druids as well. So all of those specializations are in the secondary category of pretty good. You haven't seen Mage really start to take off. Mage was quite good on the PTR, so it might be something that's a bit slower to adapt. But overall, it seems like the DPS, I think it's going to sit in a situation right now where it's right now it's pretty wide open, but I think it's going to go to a spot where it's Havoc Demon Hunter plus Augmentation Evoker plus a third. But if you really want, you can play Havoc Demon Hunter plus 2, and you can omit that Augmentation Evoker if you're not really worried about getting one shot. I will say though, there are a lot of bosses and a lot of dungeons where getting one shots like a real thing, like Blackrook Hold. Or rather the very beginning of the final boss, like the first phase of the final boss in Blackrook. There's like ambient group-wide damage, and I think that a lot of people don't understand that, but you have a chance of getting one shot if you aren't playing like a super defensive composition where people are, again, more defensive minded. And that's because like, I don't know if you guys know this, but like the very beginning of Blackrook Hold, there's that guy that's standing off to the side and he's like shooting bolts at people, and he can like randomly shoot you twice within 3 seconds and kill you like 100 to 0 if you're not really paying attention. So people are actually lusting the first part of that boss, not after the boss transforms, which makes sense at like a high key level. Another thing is like, Dark Art Thicket one-shots and stuff like that, where the Augmentation Evoker really just starts to gain a lot of value. And so there's a question as to like, I think that Aug, as you start to get into higher level keys, is going to see a decent amount more popularity. But yeah, there's a question as to whether or not it's just going to be Havoc plus Aug plus a third. And I think that the answer is maybe yes. There's also a question as to how Beast Mastery Hunter is going to evolve. That's super interesting. I will say though, early season, this is definitely a bit more diverse of a meta than you normally get. The healers are looking actually a lot healthier than they have historically, where Restoration Druid, Mistweaver Monk, and Disc Priest all look mostly fine. You can play things like Holy Paladin as well if you want to, although I will believe that they're going to be a little bit less popular this season just as a whole. And then tanks, I expect this number to go to a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunters, but there are a lot of things like that Blood DK Prot Paladin and Prot Warrior do well. There's also a question as to what the legendary weapon is going to do for Blood DK in general. Like, is Blood DK going to just like start doing insane DPS? A well-piloted Vengeance Demon Hunter, though, is quite challenging to compete with just with the way that they set up pulls, where they will misery a couple of trash packs, they'll go and grab some more mobs, and then they'll group them up, they'll drop double silent sigil, and then they're kind of balling. And that feels very insane to play with whenever you're playing with a Vengeance Demon Hunter of that caliber. Now, there are some really good stuff that Prot Warriors do, especially with Spell Reflect. I can think of like the Bats, in Darkheart Thicket. They're able to like solo those pulls with Spell Reflect. They do insane amounts of damage inside of Waycrest Manor, Lord and Lady Waycrest and the Heartsbane Triad boss and stuff like that. There's a lot of really cool stuff that Warrior does with Spell Reflect. I suspect that they're going to be a little bit behind Prot Paladins and Blood Death Knights, but I think that overall, like if you're playing any of those tanks, you can probably make it happen. I do think that it's going to start falling off and become a much more heavily dominated Vengeance Demon Hunter season, though, as the season progresses. Anyways, we're going to see. I think that whenever you look at that U.GG and Subcreation, you're kind of seeing some similar stuff as well, where it's like, Vengeance is the most popular tank, followed by Blood Decay and Prot Paladin, and then followed by the rest of the tanks. And then if you look at the tank tier list, it's the exact same thing. It's actually Brewmaster Monk ahead of Prot Warrior, which I don't think that Brewmaster is better than Prot Warrior, but like, yeah. But yeah, I think you're seeing similar things whenever you're looking at the data-driven sites as well. Anyways, we're going to be out of here today. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.